Morning. Chapter 19 is paragraph 19 in the contract is kind of wrapping up, getting towards the end. And Chapter 19 covers the representations, specifically geared towards the seller and their representation as to the title of the property at the time of closing. So what this paragraph says is that the seller is representing, as of the date of closing, there will be no unpaid liens or assessments against the property. And everything that the seller has represented up to this point survived the date of closing. So in regard particularly to the condition of the property, seller disclosure, things of that nature, just because the seller signs and moves away or moves into a different house, it doesn't relieve that seller of the liability that they made during the time of the contract and the negotiations. There's one little sentence in this paragraph that was added a few years ago, and basically it says that the property can continue to be shown and marketed for backup contracts. So, sometimes your buyer may call you and say, hey, we've got a contract on this house, but I still see it. I still see people maybe going in and looking at it. I've driven by it a few times and I've seen another agent there with a buyer. Well, in a really, really hot market, there are things that happen sometimes with a transaction after the property goes under contract, particularly during the option period. So, a buyer's financing can fall through. So, especially if it's a real nice property, good property, other agents may end up showing it for backups. Just remind your buyer that they are first in line, and they've got sort of first dibs on the property, so to speak. That's really pretty much it on chapter 19. Let's go ahead and get into chapter 20 while we're going here. The federal tax requirement, this is basically a notification where if you are conducting business with some kind of a foreign entity or a foreign person as defined by the U.S. government, and the book, I think, has a footnote. It really has a lot of footnotes on the bottom, page 184, that kind of defines, what a foreign person is. But what this paragraph wants everybody to understand, and this particularly comes into play with a seller, with a foreign seller, where if the seller doesn't have the correct documentation, for example, a tax ID number or a Social Security number that the sale can be reported to the IRS with, then the title company is going to do a withholding. So the book gives you an example of on page 183 of the withholding of 10% of the gross sales price, and they have to pay that to the IRS unless your seller has the correct documentation to prove up that they have been paying their income taxes. If they're a business entity, they've been paying their state franchise tax, their corporate income tax, and so on and so forth. The only time that I've personally ever had anything like this is we had sold a property to a nurse that was on some kind of a work visa, and she worked for one of the local hospitals here. And she didn't have any trouble at all buying. She had her correct paperwork. She had some kind of a number that was issued by our government that corresponded with her tax reporting, at the end of the year from her employer. So she didn't have any trouble at all buying because everybody could verify her income and so forth. But when she got ready to sell, until she proved up, that she had been paying income taxes, and I'm not sure exactly what she had to provide to the title company, but I do know there was some documentation there that she had to provide, or they were going to withhold 10% of her gross proceeds, and I think the house was like $120,000, so there was going to be like a $12,000 withholding unless she provided this documentation. So be aware that if you're working with a buyer or a seller that could possibly be defined as a foreign entity. The other thing that's important in this chapter on page 185 at the third paragraph from the bottom is when it talks about cash transactions. Cash transactions are not favorable in the real estate business. And when I say cash, I mean if somebody wants to pay for a property using $100 bills or $20 bills. I mean, when a customer goes into the bank and does a large cash withdrawal, particularly in excess of $10,000, there are all kinds of red flags that go up. The banking industry has duties by law to report large cash withdrawals, particularly around $10,000. Some banks may have inter-office procedures where if a customer comes in and withdraws $8,000 cash, that they have to report